Ah, here you are at last. I had hoped that a soul as curious as yours would cross the threshold of these ancient walls tonight. You'll find me in my element, where shadows dance and secrets of the past whisper in the ears of the living. Don't be fooled by the apparent tranquility of this crackling fire. This castle, my dear guests, is an open book of dark chapters, stories whispered in the dead of night. Spirits, you say? Oh, they're here, spying, listening. Perhaps even now they're watching you, curious about those who dare to listen to their tales. You're here to thrill, aren't you? To feel your heart racing and doubt creeping into the recesses of your mind. Ah, I can see by the look on your face that you're already beginning to wonder where you've been. Excellent decision, for the stories I'm about to tell you are no mere bedtime stories. No, they reflect a reality that many prefer to ignore, tales where horror and mystery mingle with the inexplicable. But please, make yourself more comfortable. Let the flickering glow of the fire envelop you. For once we begin, there will be no turning back. You are now the guests of this place, witnesses to the voices that will rise from the silence. Listen, shudder, but make no mistake. Some secrets, once revealed, will never truly leave you in peace. Are you ready? Then let the show begin. In the misty depths of the Scottish Highlands, Loch Ness stretches its dark, mysterious waters, a shadowy mirror reflecting the secrets of a distant past. Beyond the legend of the monster that is said to have made its home in its depths, a far more terrifying story haunts the shores of the loch, known only to a few unfortunate souls who have had the misfortune to hear it. This story is that of the Loch Ness Sigh. Liam, a young researcher in cryptozoology who has been fascinated by the mysteries of the loch since childhood, decides to embark on an expedition to unlock Nessie's secret. Armed with the most advanced technology, he hopes to provide irrefutable proof of the creature's existence. What he doesn't know is that the loch hides a mystery far darker and deeper than the folk tales he's studied. Arriving on the shores of the loch on a cool autumn morning, Liam sets up camp and deploys his equipment: sonar, underwater cameras, and hydrophonic recorders. The air is charged with a strange anticipation, as if the loch itself were awaiting the revelation of its secrets. The first days of the search reveal nothing exceptional apart from the usual sounds of aquatic fauna. But one night, as Liam listens to the hydrophonic recordings, he picks up a sound he's never heard before, a deep, almost human sigh echoing through the dark waters. Intrigued and slightly disturbed, he decides to delve deeper into the mystery. Over the following nights, the sigh is heard again, each time more intense, more desperate. Liam, obsessed by these sounds, plunges his equipment deeper, hoping to capture an image of what might be producing them. But what he finds is beyond his wildest imagination. One night, the sonar screen displays an unknown enormous shape, moving with strange grace through the depths. Then, suddenly, a face appears on the underwater camera screen. Not that of a prehistoric creature, but a human face, distorted by pain and time, eyes filled with infinite sadness. Liam recoils in horror as the sigh fills the air again, this time right beside him. In the days that follow, Liam is haunted by that face and that sigh. He begins to have visions, to hear voices whispering words to him in an ancient tongue, pleas, warnings. The loch seems alive, aware, calling to him, drawing him to its cold, dark waters. Driven by a force he can't explain, Liam decides to dive into the loch himself, equipped with wetsuit and camera, hoping to confront what haunts its waters and put an end to his obsession. But what he finds in the abyss changes his perception of the world forever. Plunging into the freezing cold, Liam follows the sound of sighing, descending ever deeper until he reaches a dark crevice at the bottom of the loch. There, he expects to discover the origin of the sighs, perhaps an unknown life form or natural anomaly. But what he finds in the abyss is beyond his wildest imagination. Through the gloom and underwater fog, a silhouette takes shape, slowly approaching. At first, Liam thinks he sees a prehistoric creature, but as it approaches, he realizes to his horror that it's an entirely different form of life. A sea spirit, resembling a mermaid, but masculine in appearance and visibly aggressive in nature. This creature, with its long, flowing hair and deep blue eyes, emits the sigh Liam has heard, a melancholy, terrifying sound that seems to carry with it all the pain of the deep. Its powerful, scaly tail ends in trident-like spikies, and in its hand it holds a sceptre made of a material Liam can't identify. The creature stares at Liam with an intensity that chills him to the bone, and in an ancient, forgotten language, it speaks to him. Its words resonate directly into Liam's mind, telling him the story of an underwater kingdom destroyed by human greed and ignorance, its waters poisoned by the waste of the modern world, its inhabitants condemned to suffer eternally for the sins of others. The spirit of the seas, guardian of this lost kingdom, expresses his anger and pain through his melancholy song, a warning to those who dare disturb the sacred waters of the loch. He reveals to Liam that the sigh was not an invitation, but a warning, a call to conscience to preserve what remains of purity in the world. The meeting ends with an ultimatum. Liam must leave and never return, or risk unleashing the creature's wrath on the human world. The creature makes him understand that the loch and all the waters of the world are under its protection, and that any future intrusion will be punished mercilessly. Liam, terrified but also deeply touched by the sea spirit's revelation, returns to the surface, his heart heavy but his mind enlightened. Back in civilization, he is torn between the desire to share his revolutionary discovery and the responsibility to protect the creature's secret for the good of all. Choosing to heed the sea spirit's warning, Liam keeps his story to himself, devoting himself to the environmental cause with new fervour. He now knows that legends and myths can hide important truths, calls to action to preserve the mysteries and wonders of our world. The sigh of Loch Ness remains for him a constant reminder of his encounter with the inexplicable, a reminder that behind every legend lies a truth, sometimes terrifying, often wonderful, always important. On an isolated, wind-swept island, encircled by the tumultuous waters of the Atlantic, stands the lighthouse of Eilean Mor. A lonely guide for lost ships, it keeps tireless watch. But the locals know that the lighthouse hides secrets darker than the storms it braves. The story begins when Sarah, a young documentary filmmaker with a passion for paranormal phenomena, decides to investigate the mysterious disappearances of lighthouse keepers on Eilean Mor. Armed with her camera, her courage and an insatiable curiosity, she sets out to unravel the mystery of this cursed lighthouse. As soon as she arrived, the lighthouse loomed up before her, imposing and silent, as if defying her. The inhabitants of the nearby village have told her of ghostly apparitions, cries in the night, and an evil presence haunting the place. Sarah, skeptical but intrigued, sets up her equipment and prepares to spend the night inside the lighthouse. Night falls, and with it a thick mist envelops the island, transforming the landscape into a spectral world. Sarah begins her investigation, roaming the lighthouse floors, her camera capturing every dark corner. But as she ventures into the engine room, a chill runs down her spine. A barely audible murmur makes her stop dead in her tracks. She tenses her ear, and the whisper becomes a groan, like that of a man in unimaginable pain. Suddenly, the lighthouse light goes out, plunging Sarah into total darkness. She fumbled for her flashlight, but before she could turn it on, an ice-cold hand came to rest on her shoulder. Terrified, she turns to face an apparition, the spectre of an ancient lighthouse keeper, his face distorted by time and suffering. The spectre stares back at Sarah, its eyes pleading for help, then disappears as suddenly as it appeared, leaving behind an icy cold and oppressive silence. Sarah, her heart pounding, finally turns on her lamp and decides to continue her investigation, despite the fear that grips her. As the night progresses, other inexplicable phenomena follow. Footsteps on the stairs, even though she knows she's alone on the island, voices whispering indistinct words, and the distant sound of a bell, even though none exists on Island Moor. Sarah soon discovers the diary of a missing lighthouse keeper, hidden in an old trunk. The pages, written in a trembling hand, tell the story of an evil entity awakened by an age-old storm, a creature of the deep who demands a human tribute to appease his wrath. As dawn approaches, Sarah realizes that the Island Moor lighthouse does more than guide ships. It serves as a beacon for an ancient and malevolent force, luring lonely souls to devour them. She realizes with horror that she could well be next on the list. In an act of desperation, she tries to flee the island, but the raging sea and thick fog make escape impossible. The spectre of the Guardian reappears, this time showing her the way to an ancient altar hidden in the rock, the dark heart of the island, where sacrifices were once offered to appease the creature. Sarah, seizing her only chance of survival, follows the spectre's directions. She reaches the altar just as the first rays of sunlight break through the mist. There, she realizes the unthinkable. For the lighthouse to repel the creature, a sacrifice of light, not blood, is required. With renewed determination, she uses her equipment to create an intense beam of light directed towards the heart of the island. The light seems to consume the mist, and a heart-rending howl rises from the depths, followed by sudden silence. The sun rises fully, revealing a transformed landscape. The lighthouse of Island Moor shines again, its light more powerful than ever, guiding not only ships, but also watching over the island's lost souls. Sarah leaves Island Moor at dawn, taking with her the story of the lighthouse and its spectral keeper, a story of courage in the face of darkness. She now knows that some legends carry with them forgotten truths, warnings against forces we don't understand and can't always control. And somewhere, in the mist that still shrouds the island in the distance, the spectre of the keeper keeps watch, an eternal sentinel in the fight against the shadows, ensuring that the Island Moor lighthouse remains a symbol of hope and protection against the horrors hidden in the depths of the world. In the heart of the wild Connemara moors, where the winds howl ancient secrets and the mist seems eternal, there's a story that chills the blood of all who hear it. That of the Headless Horseman, a cursed spectre wandering restlessly along the desolate paths, searching for what he can no longer find, his head. The story begins long ago in a small village nestled between mountains and lakes, where lived a proud and valiant man, Connell, known as the best horseman in the region. Connell was not only brave, but darkly handsome, with eyes that shone with a wild radiance, capturing the heart of anyone who met his gaze. But if Connell loved anything more than the admiring eyes on him, it was the adrenaline of the ride, the wind in his hair, and the limitless freedom that Connemara's vast expanses offered. One autumn night, when the moon was veiled by a veil of dark clouds and the wind carried whispers from beyond, an old prophecy was whispered by an old village woman. It spoke of a rider who, smitten with pride and daring, would defy the night of Samhain, when the veil between worlds is thinnest, and be cursed to wander headless for eternity, his soul never finding rest. Connell, scoffing at superstition and warnings, decided to defy prophecy. At midnight, as Samhain began, he mounted his pitch-black horse and galloped out onto the moors, laughing in the face of fate. But what he found was not the glory he sought, but a far darker fate. Deep in the night, a dark figure appeared before him, headless, mounted on a spectral horse. In a flash of horror, Connell realized his mistake too late. The figure was a messenger of death, come to claim his head as a trophy. The confrontation was brief. Connell, for all his bravery, could not escape the curse that awaited him. With a scream that tore through the night, his head was severed and his body fell to the ground, while his spirit was condemned to wander, a prisoner between worlds. Since that cursed night, the headless horseman has haunted the Connemara moors. Witnesses tell of hearing his horse gallop furiously through the night and seeing his dark silhouette in the moonlight, desperately searching for his lost head. Those who cross his path are said to be struck with mortal terror, their minds haunted by the image of the horseman. But the headless horseman's curse doesn't stop there. It is said that every year, on the night of Samhain, he returns to the scene of his fall, seeking a way to break his curse, and that anyone who stands in his way may find themselves drawn into his desperate quest, risking losing much more than their way across the moors. The legend of the Headless Horseman has become a warning to the people of Connemara, a dark reminder of the dangers of defying forces we don't understand, and of the price of pride. But despite the fear, the fascination with the Headless Horseman remains, drawing curious onlookers and ghost hunters to the Connemara moors, each hoping to catch a glimpse of the apparition or, for the more daring, discover a way to free Connell from his eternal curse. On Samhain night, a solitary figure stands at the edge of the village, peering into the darkness with a determination tinged with awe. Ian, descendant of the old woman who prophesied Connell's fate, carries the weight of an ancient family debt on his shoulders. He believes that the key to breaking the curse lies not in confrontation, but in understanding and forgiveness. Armed with an ancient talisman meant to protect its wearer from the spirits, Eowyn ventures out onto the moors, following ancient legends and the whispers of the wind. He reaches the place where Connell was beheaded, a hollow between the hills where the veil between worlds seems particularly thin. There he waits, heart pounding, for the rider's arrival. At midnight, the furious gallop announces the approach of the spectre. The Headless Horseman appears, more terrifying than anything Eowyn had imagined. But instead of fleeing, he stands there, raising the talisman and speaking in a firm but compassionate voice. He tells Connell his story, his mistake, but also his courage and strength. He speaks of forgiveness, of the possibility of rest for his tormented soul. The wind seems to hold its breath, and for a moment the gallop stops. The horseman approaches, his menacing bearing gradually fading. A glimmer of humanity shines through the darkness where his eyes should have been. Then, with a breath that resembles a sigh of relief, the spectre dissipates, leaving behind a gentle breeze and deep silence. Ian remains alone on the moors, the talisman still warm in his hand. The curse of the Headless Horseman of Connemara, it seems, has finally been broken. Years go by, and although the legend of the horseman continues to be told, the apparitions cease. The moors regain a peace not seen for centuries. However, on certain Samhain evenings, when the wind howls with particular force and the moon illuminates the moors with a spectral light, the most attentive can hear a distant gallop. Not that of a spectre seeking vengeance, but of a free rider riding through the mists of time and oblivion, at last at peace. The legend of the headless horseman of Connemara remains etched in memory, a horrifying tale transformed into one of hope and redemption, reminding us that even the most tormented souls can find rest, provided there is someone to listen to their story and offer forgiveness. Sally's Road winds across the desolate moors, a ribbon of asphalt that defies the elements and legends. This is where our story begins, on a moonless night when the fog clings to the ground like a spectre refusing to leave this world. James, a writer in search of thrills for his next horror novel, decides to take Sally's Road. He's heard of mysterious disappearances, ghostly apparitions, and above all, of the Traveller, an entity said to haunt this road, appearing to lone drivers to portend disaster. Intrigued and sceptical, James drives his old sedan along the road, headlights barely piercing the fog. He records his impressions on a dictaphone, sometimes laughing at his own audacity. But as he drives on, a strange sensation takes hold of him, an uneasiness he can't ignore. Suddenly, a silhouette appears in the middle of the road. James slams on the brakes, his heart pounding. Before him stands a man in a long black coat, his collar turned up, his face hidden by the shadow of his hat. The Traveller. James, both terrified and fascinated, pulls down his window to speak to the apparition. But before he can utter a sound, the Traveller raises a hand, a gesture that seems to suspend time itself. His voice, as he speaks, is like the wind whispering across the moors. Go back to where you came from, or you will follow those who disappeared before you. Refusing to give in to fear, James asks the Traveller who he is, why he haunts this road, but the apparition merely points to something behind James. When James turns around, he sees nothing but fog and a deserted road. But by the time he turns again, the Traveller has disappeared. Driven by an unhealthy curiosity, James continues on his way, ignoring the warning. But the road seems to change, becoming darker, the fog thicker. Voices whisper just out of reach, muffled laughter, distant cries. Reality becomes blurred, the boundaries between the world of the living and that of spirits blurring. Hours pass, or perhaps minutes. Time no longer makes sense on Sally's journey. Suddenly, James's car stops, the engine dying for no apparent reason. He is now alone, trapped in a no-man's land between reality and the realm of shadows. Trying to find his way back on foot, James is confronted by nightmarish visions, shadows taking on human form, faces distorted by suffering, hands reaching out to grab him. He then realizes that Sally's Road is a place of passage, a bridge between worlds, guarded by the Traveller, the damned soul of a man who once defied forces he didn't understand. James fights for survival, desperate to escape the road's grip. But every step inevitably brings him back to his starting point, as if the road itself refuses to let him go. Just when all hope seems lost, James remembers the Traveller's words, the gesture pointing behind him. With a sudden intuition, he understands that the key to his salvation may lie in that direction he had refused to explore, in that which he had chosen to ignore. Turning, James moves forward into the fog, no longer fleeing but facing what lies ahead. And there, in the darkness, he finds the source of all murmurs, muffled laughter, distant cries. Before him lies a gaping chasm, not a mere tear in the earth, but a rift between worlds, from which escape the tormented souls who once walked Sally's path. The fog around the chasm swirls, forming the faces of those who have vanished, their expressions twisted by an eternity of suffering. James, petrified, realizes the true nature of the traveller. It is not the soul of a man, but the guardian of this rift, an entity created by the curse that rests on this road, condemned to warn the living, but also to lure them to their doom should they choose to ignore its warnings. In a last gasp of despair, James tries to flee, but the shadows of the departed rise from the chasm, their hands grasping him, pulling him down. He hears the traveller's voice, clearer than ever, not as a warning, but as a farewell. Those who defy Sally's path cannot escape her fate. You're ours now. James struggles with the energy of despair, but the hands are too many, too strong. His flashlight falls to the ground, extinguishing as he is dragged into the darkness of the chasm. The fog closes in on him, muffling his cries. The next day, a passerby finds James's car abandoned by the side of Sally's road, engine off, door open. No trace of him is ever found, adding another legend to the cursed road. Sally's road continues to haunt the moors, a warning to those who dare challenge its mysteries. And somewhere, in the fog, the traveller awaits his next visitor, eternal guardian of this passage between worlds, where the living meet the lost souls, condemned to wander in limbo for eternity because of their curiosity or disbelief. James Campbell becomes another shadow among the whispers, another face in the swirling fog, another terrifying story told in half-voice by those who know the dangers of Sally's road. In the mystical depths of Killarney, where lakes like mirrors reflect the stars and hide ancient secrets, a legend arouses both fear and fascination, that of the Lady of the Lake. It is this legend that draws Nathan, a young photographer eager to capture the inexplicable, to the misty shores of Killarney's most remote lake. Armed with his camera and an insatiable curiosity, Nathan embarks on a quest to uncover the truth behind the stories of the Lady of the Lake, a spirit said to haunt the waters, luring broken hearts and lonely souls to their doom. According to local legend, she was a young woman of supernatural beauty, betrayed by her lover and drowned in the icy depths of the lake, her spirit never resting. For the first few days of his stay, Nathan is captivated by the wild beauty of the landscape, but finds no sign of the lady's presence. The locals, with whom he shares his evenings at the local pub, warn him not to venture alone to the lakeside after dark. But Nathan, sceptical and driven by a desire to unravel the mystery, chooses to ignore their advice. One night, under a moonless sky, Nathan goes to the lakeside, his camera ready to capture what his eyes might see. As the fog slowly lifts, enveloping the lake in a ghostly embrace, he catches a glimpse. A female figure floating on the surface of the water, her long black hair spreading around her like ink. Fascinated, Nathan raises his camera, but as soon as he presses the shutter release, the figure disappears, leaving him alone, breathless and with an icy chill down his spine. For the next few days, Nathan is haunted by what he has seen. He returns to the lake every night, hoping to see the lady again and prove her existence. But every time he visits, strange things happen, whispers in the wind, shudders in the dark, and that oppressive feeling of being watched. On one such visit, Nathan, driven by a growing obsession, heads for the lake, camera in hand, determined to capture some evidence of the lady's existence. As he approaches the dark waters, an icy breeze rises, carrying with it a fog, so dense it seems to swallow the light of his flashlight. Suddenly, in the midst of the oppressive silence, a scream rips through the night. A cry so human, so full of pain and despair, that Nathan is petrified. He scans the fog, trying to discern the origin of the sound, but all he can see are the shifting shadows the wind carves in the mist. The cry repeats itself, closer this time, followed by a silence heavy with menace. Nathan moves forward, guided by a force he can't explain, until he reaches a point where the fog becomes clearer, revealing a small rocky islet in the middle of the lake. On this islet stands a female figure, the Lady of the Lake, staring back at him, her eyes shining with an unearthly brilliance in the darkness. As he raises his camera to take a picture, Nathan suddenly feels the ground give way beneath his feet. He has no time to react before falling into the cold water, his camera flying out of his hand. The water is icy cold, his heavy clothes dragging him to the bottom. He struggles to reach the surface, but feels cold hands grab him by the ankles, pulling him deeper. In a desperate effort, Nathan managed to free himself and emerge, gasping for breath. He returned to shore, shivering with cold and terror. Turning back to the islet, he sees that the figure has disappeared, leaving behind only the fog that slowly closes in on the lake, as if to erase all trace of what has just happened. This disturbing night marks a point of no return for Nathan. The reality of the threat posed by the Lady of the Lake becomes indisputable, transforming his quest for proof into a struggle for his own survival. The scream he hears and the hands in the water are no longer mere elements of a distant legend, but terrifying manifestations of a very real and immediate danger. Then, on the last night of his stay, when the fog is so dense that he can barely see a few meters ahead, Nathan hears a voice, soft and melancholy, singing an old ballad of love and betrayal. Following the sound, he ventures further into the fog until he comes face to face with the Lady of the Lake. She is more beautiful than he could have imagined, but her eyes reveal infinite sadness. She invites him to join her in the water, promising to reveal all the lake's secrets and offer him the inspiration he seeks. Nathan, captivated, takes a step towards her, but in that instant he sees his reflection in the water. Not that of a living man, but of a corpse, eyes empty, skin pale and swollen with water. Horrified, he steps back, but the Lady of the Lake transforms before his eyes from a bewitching beauty to a nightmarish creature with eyes as black as the abyss and hands outstretched to grab him. Nathan realizes that the lady is not seeking to reveal the secrets of the lake, but to add his soul to those she has already taken. In a desperate race to escape her grip, Nathan stumbles and falls into the icy water. As he struggles to rise to the surface, he feels hands pulling him down into the dark depths where the lake's secrets and lost souls reside. Nathan wakes up at the lake's edge, the rising sun dissipating the last veils of fog. Trembling and soaking wet, he realizes he has narrowly escaped death. But as he stands up, he discovers his camera beside him, the lens broken, with one last photo taken, that of the Lady of the Lake, her face distorted by inhuman rage, an image so terrifying that Nathan knows he'll never be able to show it. He leaves Killarney that very day, leaving behind the cursed waters of the lake and the lady who dwells there. But even years later, he still hears the voice of the Lady of the Lake in his dreams, a bittersweet melody that reminds him of the shadows and secrets he left behind. And the Lake of Killarney continues to whisper, to sing its song of despair and loneliness, waiting for the next lonely heart to be seduced, consumed, drowned in its endless depths. London's Royal Opera House, an architectural gem steeped in history and mystery, is about to reopen after years of renovation. Among the impatient crowd is Emma, a young cultural journalist charged with covering the first performance. What she doesn't know is that the opera house is haunted by a presence that the renovations have inadvertently awakened. The opening night is a triumph, the artists' voices soaring through the air with an almost supernatural grace. But just as the last note is sounded, a piercing scream shatters the harmony. On stage, the prima donna collapses, lifeless, her face frozen in an expression of absolute horror. This tragic event marks the beginning of a series of inexplicable phenomena that plunge the opera into terror. Emma, intrigued and frightened, begins to investigate, her search leading her to the opera's dusty archives, where she discovers the story of a 19th century actor who died in a tragic accident on stage, his body never recovered. According to legend, his spirit haunts the opera house, seeking to relive the glory of his last performance. As the days go by and the date of the grand premiere draws nearer, the atmosphere within London's Royal Opera House becomes increasingly oppressive. Rehearsals, once filled with the passion and energy of the artists, are now marred by a series of inexplicable and terrifying incidents. It's not just a few sets that collapse without anyone being able to find the reason, but also props that disappear and then reappear in impossible places, as if suspended from the ceiling or locked in chests that have been locked for years. Whispers can be heard in the empty dressing rooms, almost imperceptible whispers that seem to carry indistinct messages, causing the artists to turn around frequently, searching for the origin of these voices without ever finding it. Furtive reflections in the mirrors add to the general disquiet. Silhouettes appear briefly in the glass before disappearing when stared at, leaving witnesses to doubt their own sanity. Artists and technical staff alike speak of a presence, an undeniable sensation of being observed by invisible eyes. They report feeling the brush of a cold breath on the back of their necks in the middle of a heated auditorium, or the weight of a gaze on them as they stand alone on stage. This shadow, as some are beginning to call it, seems to move with ease backstage, always dodging sight, but making itself undeniably felt. Carefully arranged costumes are found strewn across the floor, as if an invisible force had thrown them in a fit of rage. Lights flicker on and off without explanation, plunging rehearsal rooms into darkness at crucial moments, forcing artists to halt their work until the light returns as suddenly as it went out. It's during a late rehearsal, when most of the artists have left the premises, that the most terrifying incident occurs. A lead singer clearly hears her name whispered behind her. Turning abruptly, she sees nothing but the emptiness of the red velvet seats, stretching into the darkness of the hall. Convinced that her mind is playing tricks on her, she is about to resume her aria when the sensation of a cold hand resting on her shoulder sends her screaming in terror. She runs off stage, vowing never to set foot in the opera house again unaccompanied. These incidents, increasingly frequent and frightening, begin to sow doubt and fear among the cast. Whispers of an ancient curse or the vengeful spirit of a forgotten actor circulate, feeding an atmosphere already heavy with tension and anxiety. The reality of their situation becomes impossible to ignore. Something or someone residing in the shadows of London's Royal Opera House does not want the show to go on. Emma meets an old opera employee who tells her that the actor's spirit, far from simply seeking to relive his past glory, is driven by a desire for revenge against those he believes betrayed him and led to his death. He uses music to manipulate and lure his victims, seducing them with a haunting melody before revealing his true nature. The tension peaks at the second performance when Emma realizes too late that the spirit has chosen its next victim, the young rising star of the opera, destined to play the role the deceased actor coveted in his life. Emma rushes to alert those in charge, but the music has already started, the hypnotic melody filling the air, paralyzing audience and performers alike. On stage, the spirit finally reveals itself, taking on a spectral form, a silhouette draped in the costumes of its last role. His presence is both terrifying and pitiful, a ghost trapped in a bygone past, unable to find peace. He approaches the young actress, his ghostly hand rising to take her life. Emma, in an act of desperation, breaks the spell by setting off the fire alarm, the shrill sound cutting through the music and dissipating the hypnosis. The spirit, torn apart by the sudden eruption of the real world, utters a cry of agony before disappearing, leaving behind an oppressive silence. The young actress is saved, but the opera house bears the scars of that night. Emma, traumatized but determined to reveal the truth, publishes her story, exposing the dark secrets of London's Royal Opera House. However, deep down, she knows that the ghost has not been vanquished, but merely sent back into the shadows, waiting for the moment to return. The final scene of our story takes us to the now empty backstage area of the opera house, where the melody begins to be heard again, soft and seductive, a dark portent of what is yet to come. In the heart of the Scottish moors, shrouded in the mists of time, stands Blackwood Manor, a vestige of grandeur and mystery. The mansion, with its imposing towers and wild gardens, hides a dark history, tinged with tragedy and curse. The story begins when Alex Campbell, a young writer in search of inspiration, inherits the manor following the death of a distant relative he never knew. Intrigued by the rumours surrounding the manor and its previous occupants, Alex decides to move in for a few months, hoping that the isolation and history-laden atmosphere will fuel his creativity. As soon as he arrives, Alex is struck by a sense of disquiet, as if the mansion's walls were whispering warnings. He soon learns of the Blackwood curse. Generations ago, an ancestor made a dark pact, sacrificing his soul and those of his descendants in exchange for prosperity and power. Since then, the family has been plagued by untimely deaths, mysterious disappearances, and inexplicable phenomena. Despite warnings from villagers and early nights troubled by strange noises, Alex remains determined to unlock the Blackwood's secret. His search leads him to discover a diary belonging to Elizabeth Blackwood, the family's last direct heiress who had mysteriously disappeared a century before. The diary reveals the existence of a hidden room in the manor house, a sanctuary where the ancestor had carried out the cursed pact. Convinced that the key to the curse lies in this room, Alex sets out to find it, navigating the manor's labyrinthine corridors and secret passageways. One night, as the storm rages outside, Alex finally discovers the entrance to the hidden room. Inside, he finds ancient artifacts, occult symbols carved into the walls, and an altar on which rests an ancient book containing the original pact and instructions on how to break it. The moment Alex pushes open the heavy door, concealed behind an ancestral bookcase, an icy chill runs through the manor. As if disturbed from a deep sleep, a wave of dark energy ripples through the corridors, making the ancient wood creak and the weathered portraits quiver. It's not simply the cold air of the room that greets Alex, but an evil presence, a force that had been waiting, lurking in the shadows, nurtured by decades of silence and oblivion. The mansion itself seems to awaken, reacting to this intrusion with palpable hostility. Outside, the previously clear sky is suddenly overcast, clouds gathering in a dark, menacing mass, while lightning streaks the emerging darkness. A furious wind rises, howling around the manor's towers as if a supernatural storm had been summoned by the revelation of the hidden room. Windows shake under the force of the wind, and doors slam shut, guided by an invisible will. Inside, shadows begin to dance. But these are no ordinary shadows cast by storm-tossed furniture and candelabras. They densify, stretch and take shape. The Blackwood ancestors, whose portraits lined up in the galleries offered only a faint glimpse of their former splendour, emerge from the frames in spectral form. Their faces are imbued with eternal sadness and cold anger, blaming the living for daring to disrupt their damnation. These spectres, prisoners of a pact that sealed their fate and that of their descendants, now wander in an intermediate dimension, neither alive nor quite dead, condemned to relive over and over again the consequences of their ancestors' overweening ambition. Each spectre bears the scars of its own tragic history. Torn and soiled period garb, eyes that burn with an unearthly light, hands outstretched as if to grasp or implore. They whisper, moan, and sometimes scream, their voices mingling with the wind to create a macabre symphony that echoes through the manor. Their recriminations are directed at Alex, but also at the evil spirit that holds them captive, preventing them from finding rest. The room where Alex stands, now the centre of this spectral torment, seems to be the very heart of the curse. The walls are etched with ancient symbols that pulsate with dark light, while the altar, covered in dust and ashes, bears the marks of the infernal pact. The air is so heavy with despair that every breath becomes a challenge, every step a struggle against the force that seeks to overwhelm him. Alex realizes that to break the curse, he must perform a ritual that requires not only courage, but also sacrifice. Torn between fear and compassion for the tormented souls of the Blackwoods, he decides to risk his own life to end the curse. On the night of the ritual, Alex is confronted with the true nature of the pact, a choice between freeing the Blackwoods and succumbing to the curse himself. The Blackwood spectres gather around him, their faces expressing age-old pain and fragile hope. In a terrifying finale, Alex completes the ritual amid the ghosts' cries and the crashing of the storm. As day breaks, the manor returns to a precarious calm. The shadows dissipate and silence replaces the murmurs. Alex survives the night, but is forever changed. The Blackwood curse is lifted, but at the cost of discoveries that haunt him. Human nature, capable of sinking into darkness for the promise of fleeting power and redemption, possible even after centuries of torment. Blackwood Manor, freed from its curse, remains standing on the Scottish moors, a monument to both human folly and the capacity for redemption. Alex leaves the manor, taking with him the lessons learned and the memories of a night that changed the course of Blackwood history. And somewhere in the depths of the manor, Elizabeth Blackwood's diary closes, the last page marking the end of an era of darkness for the Blackwood family and the beginning of a new story, written not with despair, but with hope for a future free from the curse. In the modern town of New Hamelin, ancient legends seem to belong to another world, a mere echo of a bygone past. But some stories refuse to die, feeding on society's hidden fears and desires. Among these tales, that of the flautist of Hamelin resurfaces, taking on a terrifying new form. Jason, a music teacher at the local high school, discovers an old wooden flute at a flea market. Intrigued by its exquisite craftsmanship and strange aura, he buys it without hesitation. Soon after, he begins playing the flute for his students, noticing its uncanny ability to captivate and calm the most boisterous among them. However, things soon take a sinister turn. As soon as Jason introduces the ancient flute into his lessons, a palpable transformation takes place among his pupils. At first, their fascination seems innocent, a simple appreciation of the instrument's melodious beauty. But soon, this fascination becomes an obsession. The children, once scattered and individual in their interests and friendships, begin to form a tight-knit group, united by an inexplicable attraction to Jason and his flute. They follow him with silent devotion, their eyes shining with a disturbing intensity every time he plays. Their conversations, once centered on children's games and stories, now revolve around the flute and its melodies. They exchange tales of strange dreams in which Jason's music fills the air, a nocturnal symphony that invites them to join together in an unknown place, bathed in light and sound. This obsession intensifies as the children begin to report hearing the melody of the flute even outside school, a soft, haunting melody that seems to float through their bedroom windows at night. They describe an irresistible call, a force that pulls them from their beds, driving them to gather outside, to wander the deserted streets of New Hamelin in search of the music's origin. Each morning they return home, tired and confused, unable to remember where they've been or what they've done, only that they must hear the music again and again. Jason observes these changes with growing concern. What began as an innocent musical experience seems to have triggered something dark and deeply ancient. Parents start asking him questions, concerned about their children's altered behavior. Murmurs of fear and suspicion spread among the adults, evoking old legends they'd rather forget. The tension reaches a climax when, one night, Jason himself begins to hear the melody, not emanating from the flute beside his bed, but echoing outside, floating through the night breezes of New Hamelin. The sound is both beautiful and terrifying, filled with a sadness and longing that drives him to the window, his trembling hands reaching for the latch. In this moment, Jason understands the true nature of the flute and the power it holds. It's not just an instrument, but a catalyst, awakening an ancient magic that binds the children of New Hamelin to a will not their own. A magic that, if left unchecked, could lead them all to a horrific end. Jason decides to stop playing the flute and put it away out of sight, but the melody continues to echo in his head, driving him to madness. One night, under the spell of the melody, Jason finds himself wandering the streets of New Hamelin, playing his flute without being able to stop. The children, as if drawn by a magnet, leave their homes and follow him. He leads them through the sleepy town to an ancient, forgotten tunnel hidden beneath the foundations of the modern city. When they reach the tunnel, unimaginable horror awaits them. The tunnel is the domain of an ancient entity, an evil spirit who once made a pact with the original flautist, trading the souls of children for an eternity of youth and power. By playing the flute, Jason has unwittingly awakened the spirit and fulfilled his part of the pact. The children enter the tunnel, disappearing one by one into the darkness, their cries of horror echoing against the stone walls. Jason, now fully aware of the horror of his actions, tries to save them, but it's too late. The spirit, satisfied, offers him the promised eternal youth, but at a terrifying price. Jason becomes the new guardian of the tunnel, condemned to lure the souls of children for eternity. The town of New Hamelin awakes to discover that its children have disappeared. The desperate search that follows reveals no clues, apart from a wooden flute abandoned at the entrance to the sealed tunnel. Jason and the children of New Hamelin become a new legend, a terrifying warning whispered on dark nights to the melody that calls souls to their doom. And somewhere in the depths beneath the city, the sound of a flute continues to play, an eerie reminder that some stories, however ancient, never really die. In the misty wilds of the Irish moors, the small town of Glen Harrow hides a dark secret. Every year, as winter approaches, the village's children begin to disappear, one by one, without a trace. The elders speak in hushed tones of an ancient curse, while the younger ones blame a lone wolf prowling the moors. But for Sarah, back in her hometown after years of absence, the disappearances seem to be linked to something far more terrifying. Sarah, a young teacher, decides to conduct her own investigation following the disappearance of her nephew. Her search leads her to an old diary belonging to her great-grandmother, revealing the existence of an ancient and malevolent entity hidden deep in the moors. This entity doesn't seek ritual offerings, but feeds on the memories and essence of children, gradually erasing them from reality. As the pages turn, Sarah discovers that the moor itself is a living labyrinth, changing and reshaping itself to trap its victims. The children are not simply lost, they are lured into the depths of the moor by the whispers of this entity, which imitates the voices of their loved ones to seduce them away from their world forever. Armed with this knowledge, Sarah embarks on a desperate quest to save the missing children. She joins forces with Thomas, a writer specializing in Irish folklore, who believes the entity can be confronted by using the ancient legends of the moor against it. Together, they head out onto the moor at dusk, following an ancient path Sarah found in her great-grandmother's diary. Their journey leads them to a forgotten stone circle where the mists of the moor are at their densest and most alive. This is where the entity resides, a chasm of shadows and wind where the voices of lost children whisper just out of reach. The air around the stone circle shudders with malevolent energy, each breath of wind carrying the cries and laughter of lost children. Confronted with the unspeakable abomination that stands before them in the beating heart of the moor, Sarah and Thomas understand the immensity of the challenge ahead. The mist around them seems to thicken, taking on tormented forms as if the entity itself is seeking to envelop them in its icy embrace, to silence them before they can act. But armed with the ancient knowledge contained in legends and stories handed down through the generations, they stand firm, determined to confront this horror not with symbols or incantations, but with the brute force of their will and courage. In a bold act of defiance, Sarah begins to list aloud the names of all the missing children, each syllable uttered with a conviction and strength that seems to defy the very nature of the entity. Thomas joins her, his voice mingling with hers, creating a chorus of human resistance against the darkness that surrounds them. The children's names, carried by their will, cut through the mist, insinuating themselves into the interstices of the veil that separates the world of the living from that of the shadows. They call on the children to return, to break the invisible chains that hold them captive in this lightless abyss. As the names echo through the air, an invisible struggle unfolds. The entity, accustomed to reigning unchallenged over its domain of despair, finds itself destabilized by this unexpected attack. Cracks appear in the veil of mist, as if the mere mention of the children's names erodes the entity's power over them. But the horror that rules the moor doesn't back down so easily. It responds with inhuman fury, the wind howling like the voices of 1,000 damned souls, trying to drown out the sound of their voices, to drive them to abandonment. But Sarah and Thomas don't flinch. Their determination seems to draw on something deeper than the simple will to save the children. It's a fight for the very soul of Glen Harrow, a rebellion against the darkness that has too long smothered the moor under their grip. They feel the support of past generations, echoes of ancient battles waged against the darkness, strengthening their resolve. As the duel intensifies, the barrier between the worlds begins to waver, weakening under the relentless assault of their courage and faith in the legends. The forms of the children begin to materialize in the mist, first as simple silhouettes, then increasingly clear, as if slowly drawn from a nightmarish dream into reality. The children's faces, imbued with unspeakable confusion and fear, turn to Sarah and Thomas, their eyes desperately searching for a way out, a way back into their stolen lives. It's a moment of triumph and terror, for although the children are beginning to emerge from the entity's grip, it is concentrating all its malevolence and power in a last-ditch effort to maintain its hold on them more, and on the fate of all those who have dared to defy it. But the entity doesn't give in. It materializes in the form of a storm of wind and mist, its arms made of fog trying to envelop them, to suffocate them in its icy embrace. Sarah, in the midst of the tumult, realizes that the entity cannot be defeated by words alone. It requires a sacrifice, an act of loss and remembrance to break its hold on the moor. In a final gesture of desperation, Sarah offers her own childhood memories, her essence, to replace that of the missing children, crying out her own name in the turmoil. The entity, bewildered and hungry, pounces on her, absorbing her memories, leaving behind an emptied Sarah, an almost memoryless shell of her past life. At dawn, the storm dissipates. The Glenharrow children mysteriously reappear in their beds, safe and sound, but with no memory of their disappearance. Sarah is found unconscious near the stone circle, her memory erased, but her sacrifice has broken the cycle of disappearances. Glenharrow reunites with its children, but at the cost of forgetting Sarah, who must relearn to live in a world she saved at the cost of her own memories. The moor remains silent, watching, perhaps waiting for the moment when it will once again claim its due. The ending of Children of the Heath is a sombre reminder that in the struggle against ancient horrors, victories can be as devastating as defeats, and that heroes are sometimes not those who win, but those who sacrifice everything for those they love. In the misty lands of Scotland, where legends are woven in the breath of the wind, Stirling Castle stands imposing and majestic, overlooking the plain where history has often turned. But it's another, much darker story that haunts the old stones of this place. That of the White Lady of Stirling, a spectre whose presence is as terrifying as it is unexplained. Once upon a time, in the dark corridors of the castle, there lived a lady of unparalleled beauty, dressed in white, whose love was betrayed. Lady Annabel, devoted wife of the lord of the castle, was falsely accused of infidelity and condemned to a fate worse than death. Her husband, blinded by jealousy and the poisonous advice of a power-hungry adviser, ordered her confined to the castle's highest towers, where she was left to die of hunger and loneliness, her only companion the icy wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. But death was only the beginning of her torment. It is said that his spirit never found rest, condemned to wander the chambers and corridors of the castle, mourning his lost love and shattered life. His appearance is always preceded by a chill in the air, a breath of wind colder than death, and his unearthly pale face appears to those unfortunate enough to cross his path, his empty eyes reflecting desolation and madness. Generations of residents and visitors to the castle have reported seeing her, floating noiselessly through the corridors at dusk, or standing at the top of the tower, looking out over the plain, as if waiting for someone to return. Some say that when she stares at you, an unspeakable sadness comes over you, a despair so deep that many have lost their minds. Full moon nights are her favourite, say the village elders. That's when her power seems strongest, and her melancholy moans echo through the castle walls, a sound so desolate it can freeze the blood in your veins. It's said that on these nights she seeks out souls to join her in her eternal solitude, broken hearts or tormented minds, the only ones who can understand her eternal pain. But the lady in white doesn't just haunt the living with her spectral presence. There are stories, whispered on winter nights around the crackling fire, of far more sinister events. Unexplained disappearances, fatal accidents for which no cause could be found, attributed to the curse that Lady Annabel had cast on the castle and its inhabitants. A curse that would only end when the truth about her tragic fate was revealed and justice done. Such was the case one autumn evening when John McCleary, a sceptical historian investigating the castle's legends, came face to face with the lady in white. Armed only with his reason, he had trodden the ancient floors, mocking local superstitions. Yet at midnight, as he crossed the great hall, the cold descended upon him, a chill that seemed to emanate from within his very soul. And there, under the pale moonlight filtering through the windows, she appeared, more beautiful and more terrifying than anything he'd ever imagined. Her gaze fell on him, and in her eyes he saw not only his own death, but all the pain in the world. It was the last thing he saw before sinking into madness, endlessly murmuring words of love and betrayal. Since that day, no one has dared to challenge the legend of the White Lady of Stirling. She remains solitary and melancholy, a sentinel of ancient times, reminding those still living that some secrets should remain buried and that betrayal can haunt long after death. And would you, dear listeners, dare to visit Stirling Castle on a cold, full moon night? Perhaps you'll hear Lady Annabel's sigh, or even worse, meet her despairing gaze. But beware, for those who have attempted to unravel the mystery of the Lady in White have never really returned whole. Dear visitors, we've come to the end of our vigil. I hope you have found my stories as captivating as they have been disturbing, taking your minds into the darkest recesses of the imagination. I leave you now with your thoughts, with the chill that runs down your spine as you wonder whether these tales are simply the product of an unbridled imagination or whether they tap into the buried truths of ancient times. But remember, what I've revealed to you tonight is just a taste of the stories that haunt the darkest corners of this world. Whether or not you believe in wandering spirits, hungry ghosts, or creatures haunting the moors, I wish you a night filled with chills and nightmares. May you find sleep, however terrifying, and remember, night is the realm of shadows, where secrets whisper in the wind and unspoken truths wait in the dark. Until our paths cross again, take care not to awaken the shadows that sleep in the deepest silence.